Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for Weather Extra. I'm meteorologist Jillian Grace. The cold air has been moving south out of Canada and across the nation over the past week. Nearly 300 million Americans felt winter's grasp, with temperatures dropping between 10 and 30 degrees below normal. Many seeing their first freeze of the season, including us here in Central Texas. Right, Brady?
Yeah, Jillian, we saw our first official freeze last weekend, officially on November the 12th, which is 10 days earlier than when we should. Our typical first freeze is on November 22nd. And if you're wondering what a typical winter brings us, well, that's 34 freezes throughout the entire winter months. But we really see that increase start to happen as we head through the months of December into January. January typically brings us our most freezes as we average around 11 to 12. And then we'll see those freezes drop off later in the winter and as we head more into the springtime months. Now, last year, we all remember the cold snap we had in February. We officially had 50 freezes, and actually the last 3 years have brought above normal amounts of freezes. The all-time record is 70, which was set back in the winter of 2013 and 2014. So we're getting into that time of year where freezes become more of an occurrence, and we'll likely see a lot more as we push into December and January.
Well, here in Central Texas, the cold temperatures also came with some much needed rain last week, but up to our north, it was a different scenario as record snow fell in some spots, leaving behind a winter wonderland. A strong winter-like storm tracked across the United States last week, bringing the first measurable snow of the season to many cities. The work week started with over 7 inches of snow in parts of Oklahoma, more snow impacting millions in the Midwest to the higher terrains in the Northeast. 1 to 3 inches fell in parts of Iowa, Missouri, Minnesota, and Illinois, with widespread snow of 1 to 4 inches falling north of the Mason-Dixon line. A significant lake effect snowstorm around the Great Lakes buried parts of New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, with multiple feet of snow recorded, making residents think winter had made an early arrival. And heading out into West Texas, a 5.3 magnitude earthquake struck on Wednesday afternoon in Mentone, about 35 miles northwest of Pecos, which was, as you can see on this map, just to the east of El Paso and also to the west of Midland. People as far north as Lubbock and as far south as Austin and San Antonio, and even down into Mexico, reported feeling this quake. This was the strongest quake since 1995 and the 4th strongest in Texas since records have been kept since 1923. All right, switching gears to Thanksgiving. With the holiday just around the corner, we turn to meteorologist Sean Bellafury, who discusses the averages and extremes we see on Turkey Day.
Well, for a myriad of reasons, the holiday time, Thanksgiving, Christmas, is some of the favorites here in for the weather team. Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday out of all of those that come towards the end of the year. So let's see what we're cooking up this Thanksgiving. And oh, hey, wouldn't you know it, it is a perfectly average Thanksgiving. Now, this isn't the forecast, but on a Thanksgiving day, 66 degrees would be our normal high temperature, 43 would be our normal low temperature, and on average, on any given Thanksgiving, we would have about a 23% chance of seeing some sort of precipitation. Thanksgiving, of course, the date does vary, but the average high and low, like I just mentioned, 66 to 43 degrees. The warmest we have ever been on a Thanksgiving was 84 on November 23rd, 1967, and on the 24th in 1910, but that cold, chilly morning, the coldest Thanksgiving ever, was 19 degrees, November 30th back in 1911. Now, we mentioned about the 23% chance on average of seeing rain any given Thanksgiving. If we do see rain, it typically amounts about to 1/4 inch, with the rainiest Thanksgiving coming back in 1958, almost 1 1/4 inches of rain. And believe it or not, we have had 6 Thanksgivings with wintry weather, including 3 times where it has snowed. As we take a look at this Thanksgiving across the United States, notice that much of the country is expected to see near normal conditions. Some of us a little bit warmer, some of us a little bit cooler, but heads up, if you do have any Thanksgiving travel plans next week, especially to the East Coast, that is where we have a high chance of above normal precipitation. Of course, us here in Texas included. This piece of energy coming from the Pacific Northwest could potentially turn into a big storm system on Thanksgiving Day, the day after Thanksgiving, and into the weekend. So if you have travel plans to the eastern coast, keep a lookout. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafury, KWTX News 10.
Thanks, Sean. And staying on the Thanksgiving theme, are you noticing less turkeys in grocery stores this year? Well, farmers in Idaho are saying there aren't enough to go around due to various reasons. Nicole Camerata explains more on this.
Right behind me, there's about 225 turkeys, and this is actually about half the amount that this local farm normally sees. And there's a couple of reasons as to why they're seeing a smaller supply of turkeys this year compared to others.
We started off the year as normal at our normal time with 600 birds. They had not even left the brooding barn yet. The bird flu came into the area.
After a neighboring farm was hit with bird flu, Caballo Farm in Cuna had to sequester their own animals to keep them healthy.
Locking them up inside was the first slowdown. When we're looking at 600 turkeys that are our bread and butter for the season, we didn't dare let them outside.
Forcing Kathy Caballo to leave her turkeys inside for an extra 6 to 8 weeks.
That is their natural behavior, is to huddle very, very closely. And when they huddle very closely, they create a pile, and unfortunately, when they're very small, they'll suffocate the ones on the bottom. We lost almost half of our birds to a piling incident in the barn because they couldn't get outside.
Down the street at Vogel Farms, they had to do the same, bring the birds inside to keep them safe.
So that kind of slowed their growth a little bit. We lost some that we normally wouldn't have if they were allowed to go outside. But it was a decision, if they get the bird flu, they're all dead. That, decreased our numbers a bit.
The heat wave that came through Idaho also hindered the birds' ability to grow.
The heat did not kill them off, but it slowed them way down. They couldn't continue to grow and live through the heat. So their bodies naturally reacted by simply slowing down their growth. And then once it started cooling down here about 4 weeks ago, the growth started picking up.
When cooler temperatures finally arrived last month, growth started to pick back up, but Kathy says they're already sold out.
We usually sell out about the second week in November. If we have a year where there's no serious issues that cause them to go down, we don't have a problem with selling out. We'll sell close to out, but not totally out.
I do know a lot of people are calling me, and they're calling around, and there aren't the birds. And they're a lot more expensive this year.
Inflation causing the prices of just about everything from feed to gasoline for equipment to go up, impacting the prices of birds.
We had to increase our price. We're not having to buy the ready-made feed. I don't go for a huge markup. And so I just want everybody to be able to afford a turkey.
Everything has gone up, so we sat down and did all the math, and we did have to raise the prices. Our world is changing. There's a lot of supply chain issues. There's a lot of new diseases, and the weather changes have been immense. Be understanding if your store or your supplier runs out. Say, okay, maybe next year. Life is constantly changing, and we're doing the best we can.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. We turn to the Sunshine State, who was badly hit by another hurricane just 10 days ago. Hurricane Nicole hit Florida's Atlantic coast back on November 10th as a Category 1 storm with winds of 75 miles per hour. And we're learning tonight that the estimated cost of damage could be over $500 million. Nicole's landfall this late in the season is unusual. It's only the second hurricane to ever make landfall in the continental United States after November 4th. You're looking now at some drone footage of Daytona Beach shores a day after the storm hit. This video shows just how badly damaged some of the homes and retaining walls were after the storm. Many left in piles of debris along the shore. Some beachside structures were said to be unsafe after Nicole, prompting local officials to evacuate 24 hotels and condos. Many saying the damage left behind is undeniable. And to show us what conditions look like after the storm hit, we turn to Elise Preston, who was down on Daytona Beach. Take a look.
This is what's left after Hurricane Nicole battered Florida's eastern coast. Powerful storm surge swept the foundations from under beachside homes, triggering widespread collapse and ruin. Communities in Daytona Beach shores and nearby Wilbur by the Sea were among the hardest hit. Residents like property manager Crystal Goodrich say living here wasn't always such a risk.
We did not build as if we were going to be overlooking the ocean. This was not an area that has ever even flooded.
But this time, the remnants of some homes were swept out to sea. Floodwaters overtook city streets. Heavy winds downed trees and knocked down power lines. At one point, more than 330,000 people were without electricity statewide.
Our infrastructure took a beating from Hurricane Ian. There was no way that we could have ever recovered from that. And now here comes Nicole.
Mike Chitwood is the Volusia County Sheriff. He called Hurricane Nicole a knockout punch and said more than 600 people had been evacuated from condos that were declared structurally unsafe.
What's going through your mind right now?
It's heartbreaking. Our town's in for some pretty hard times, I think.
Marcy Dutton has lived in Daytona Beach off and on since the 1970s. She used to sell ice cream on the beach.
We are a tourist town. That beach is our life, our lifeline. And when we no longer have that, it's going to affect the economy of this town.
Officials here have called the structural damage unprecedented and fear even more buildings could collapse in the coming days. Elise Preston, CBS News, Daytona Beach, Florida.
Nicole ripped through Cape Canaveral, Florida, with wind gusts reportedly reaching up to 100 miles per hour, inflicting minor damage to Artemis 1, NASA's new moon rocket. Thankfully, crew working on Artemis was able to repair that damage quickly ahead of the fast-approaching launch date. After many other obstacles in addition to Nicole, that launch finally happened this past Wednesday. Christian Benavides has more from the Kennedy Space Center.
And liftoff of Artemis 1. A successful liftoff for NASA's most powerful rocket.
It's like the first moon launch in 50 years, right? So that's like historical.
The Artemis 1 mission finally launched after 8 months of back and forth from its launch pad. It was delayed by 2 hurricanes and numerous technical issues, including hydrogen leaks. New leaks showed up Tuesday night, just before the launch window opened, and a group of NASA technicians, known as the Red Crew, were sent onto the launch pad to assess and fix the leak.
My heart was pumping, my nerves were going, but yeah, we showed up today.
The rocket has sent the Orion capsule with no astronauts on board on a journey around the moon. In 25 days, it's expected to splash down in the Pacific.
The Artemis 1 mission is an important step in NASA's efforts to eventually carry astronauts back to the moon as early as 2025, 50 years after the Apollo program ended.
We are stressing it and testing it to make it as safe as possible, as reliable as possible for when our astronauts crawl on board and go back to the moon.
The price tag for this mission, more than $4 billion.
Coming up after the break, we take a look at this week's Degrees of Science. Stick with us.
In this week's episode of Degrees of Science, we talked to Aaron O'Connor, Program Specialist 3, and Emily Wall, Chief Operating Officer, both for the Forest Resource Protection Division of Texas A&M Forest Services. From responding to wildfires to the ongoing recovery, this organization strives to protect Texas from wildfires and other types of disasters. I want to welcome you both, ladies. I know this has been an extremely hot and dry year, like we just said, for Texas. Can you tell me a little bit more about this season as a whole?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much for having us to talk about this today. So 2022 has been a very busy year. It's certainly one of the most significant wildfire seasons that we've had in the state of Texas, definitely since 2011, which I think most Texans remember, especially if they were living here. All year, the number of wildfire responses and acres burned was above normal. So we were just at an elevated pace all year. And it's actually something that kind of set up and started in 2021. So during the summer of 2021, we received a significant amount of rainfall, which caused growth of our grasses and forbs across the state. And so then when we had the freeze come the winter of 2021 into the new year, that created a catalyst for our winter spring fire season. And with underlying droughts and just really intense conditions this year with drying and hot temperatures and winds and frontal passages, it just created an environment that was conducive to wildfire activity. And we just saw continued activity throughout the entire year.
So this has historically been a male-dominated field, and I'm talking to two beautiful ladies here. Tell me a little bit more about what the female representation is like in your field and an effort to increase female participation.
Yeah, sure. So Texas A&M Forest Service, our leadership really seeks to increase diversity across the wildland firefighting profession. According to the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, women represent less than 8% of all U.S. firefighters. Even in our own agency in Texas A&M Forest Service, there are very few women in leadership positions. So we're always looking to increase diversity just across our agency as a whole. One of those ways that we've tried to do that is an event that we recently hosted called Sisters in Fire. And it's an event that's aimed at youth that are age 12 to 17 to kind of teach them a little bit about the different tools, dozers, equipment, everything you use, as well as the wildland firefighting culture. There's a lot of agencies involved in putting that on. And so it not only helps, the young women to learn about the culture, but it also helps the folks in our different agencies come together, put something on, work on those partnerships, much like we would on a real wildfire. Those are a lot of the same agencies that we'd be responding with.
Well, thank you both so much for what you do. I know it's so important to see different people seeing themselves being represented in different types of fields. And so all the work that you guys are doing, I just want to say thank you so much. We just got through the long, hot, dry summer. We're already dry going into fall. Can you guys tell us a little bit more about what you kind of see happening for the rest of the year, maybe even beyond?
Yeah. So the forecast is showing that we anticipate the next few months to be warmer than normal and to have minimal precipitation. So we're anticipating that we're going to be seeing wildfire activity through the end of the year, perhaps into the new year, especially when we start to get those freezes again. We should get some moisture that should hopefully kind of keep things, a little damp, a little slower pace than we saw maybe earlier this year. But that wildfire activity is there. So we definitely really need everybody's help just to be cautious as we move into these months. I think, it's easy to kind of get complacent when we're not in that full out mode like we were this summer.
Yeah, and what are some things that we can do to help fight the wildfires, help to prevent the wildfires as we get into this, like you said, more dry weather as we go towards the end of the year and towards the new year too?
Right. So Texas A&M Forest Service, we encourage everybody to be aware of what's going on. Check your weather forecasts. If it's warm, if it's dry, if you haven't had rainfall in your area, maybe postpone any activities, like if you're burning your debris or anything that can cause a spark. Just wait a couple days until things maybe get a little bit better. We encourage everybody to check for burn bans. Those are really important to follow. And those are put on by the county, so your county should have information. We also post a daily map on our website that gets updated as things are reported to us, so you can check there. But checking for burn bans, any other burning restrictions, watching your conditions, and then just being really mindful of activities that can cause a spark. It's usually the things that we don't always think about that can create a wildfire or an ignition source. And if you are going to be doing anything outdoors, just being cautious, having a water source nearby, maybe clearing that vegetation or any other hazards from the area so that you're less likely to have an ignition that grows into wildfire and escapes from your area.
To catch this full interview, go to KWTX.com/degrees of science or scan the QR code on your screen and it will take you to our YouTube page.
All right, after the break, we're going to be taking a look back at a major tornado event that moved through Central Texas back in '97. That interview straight after the break.
May 27th, 1997, one of the most destructive and deadly severe weather days in Central Texas history. We wanted to get a meteorological perspective, and I couldn't think of anyone better than former KWTX meteorologist Lon Curtis, because no one probably had as good a perspective of all the tornadoes that day and has done as much research as Lon has done. So when you got up the morning of the Gerald tornado and walked outside. Explain to folks how the atmosphere felt in Central Texas.
Well, I've lived in Central Texas all my life, and I had never felt the kind of humidity that when I walked out the door at 6:15 in the morning on the 27th of May to get the daily paper, it was like a sauna. And I went inside and obtained some weather information on the internet. The dew points, there's the temperature and the dew point temperature, and the closer they are together, the more it's like a sauna. And the dew points were up around 78 degrees that morning. That's what you would expect maybe down at Brownsville. So that was a bell going off. And what went through my mind was all that driving to and from Oklahoma the last 2 days, and today tornadoes are coming to me.
Yeah.
And I thought that was humorous when it went through my head. Later in the day, it turned out to be a very sad situation.
Yes, very true. And so the majority of tornadoes that we deal with during severe weather season typically move east, northeast is kind of the general track if most people think tornadoes move. But on the day of the Gerald tornado, they were moving more of a south-southwesterly direction. And I know that's something that people, and you've done a lot of talking and research about. I mean, it's not something that's never happened before, but it is a pretty rare occurrence.
It is, although I should mention that the year after the Gerald tornado, 1998, and the year after that, 1999, there were storms that produced tornadoes in Central Texas that moved toward the south-southwest. So it's not often that you see that, but even as far back as 1921 or 22, there were twin tornadoes in Austin that also moved toward the south-southwest before they turned more toward the west. They certainly weren't moving toward the northeast. So it's something, if you want to keep up with severe weather in Central Texas, it's something you sort of have to have in the back of your mind. They don't all go from southwest to northeast.
Yeah, and so it had the different movement, but also just extremely slow moving storms too. I mean, tornadoes move at different speeds depending on how the thunderstorms are moving, but I don't know in my time if I've tracked a storm moving 10 miles per hour or the speed as slow as the Gerald tornado moved that day.
Yeah, and the Gerald tornado, as well as the tornado at Lake Belton Morgan's Point, as well as the ones that were in McLennan County, were all very slow moving. And the Gerald tornado started from what was left of the circulation of a tornado at Prairie Dell in southernmost Bell County. And initially it developed into 4 cyclonic rotation circulations going around in a circle. It eventually matured into a tornado capable of wiping out anything in its path, including asphalt on the roadways. And it moved very slowly, and it left everything in its path: homes, cattle, and human beings torn apart.
Well, that's all our time for this episode of Weather Extra. Us at KWTX want to wish you and your loved ones early happy Thanksgiving. Have a great week, everyone. Good night.